A very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second AMA session of the year. So in line with the recent International Women's Day, IFL is pleased to present to you today's topic of interest, financial planning for women. I am Jolene here, an associate trainer representing the Institute for Financial Literacy, and it's my great pleasure to be able to share with you on today's topic. But before we begin, allow me to give a very brief introduction of IFL. So we are actually a collaboration between Monies and Singapore Polytechnic International. We provide free and unbiased financial education to the public. So in line with that, we do not give any financial advice, but in the course of our sharing, we may make mention of certain industries, companies, or even product references. The reason why we do that is to illustrate to participants how we can apply and utilize certain financial concepts. Having said that, should you wish to seek further financial advice, either on the insurance or the investment front, please consult a licensed financial advisor who can make product recommendations to you after understanding your current financial situation and also to understand your financial goals. So, without further ado, let us begin today's topic, financial planning for women. Now, it is important that we understand what does financial planning entails, right? And while we do acknowledge that the broad principles should apply to both gender, what we would like to do this afternoon is really to examine this topic through the lens of a woman, and we also like to highlight what are certain key areas to look out for. We will have a Q&A. In fact, prior to today's session, it's very heartening to see we already have quite a few questions coming in, which we definitely will answer. Right, we will focus on some personal experience as women in finance. Okay, so when we talk about financial planning, we are recognizing that having adequate and good planning is important. It is important to help us achieve good financial fitness and also to build a strong financial foundation for our future. So while some people may be very apprehensive of financial planning, but we would like to take it a bit simpler, 1, 2, 3, 3 steps, right? Think of it as anchoring the 3 pillars of savings, protection, and investment, right? Financial planning can be as simple as that. Now we talk about savings, right? The regular savings helps to be able to build our resources in order for us to achieve our financial goals, right? And our financial goals can range from establishing an emergency saving fund to even purchasing a home, or even in the long term, to be able to meet our retirement needs. Establishing our savings is important, but we also need a suitable investment strategy to help grow our resources, not just to beat inflation, but at the same time, we want to be able to grow them because we recognize we can make use of compound interest. The key then is, of course, to employ a suitable investment strategy in line with our risk profile. Last but not least, the third pillar to a good financial plan, right, is the protection pillar. Having insurance, right, is important, because it helps to protect our income and financial well-being. A good plan must always envisage some unexpected outcomes, right? And during these unexpected outcomes, it may come a point that our financial cash flow is threatened. Therefore, having insurance in place will ensure that not just ourselves, but also our loved ones are being looked after. Some example of important protection need could be as simple as the home protection scheme, right, whereby husband and wife can ensure that both of them are insured 100% regardless of income, so that in the very unforeseen event of the demise of a sole breadwinner, the surviving spouse would be able to maintain the roof over the heads of the family. But for me to go into all 3 pillars, I'm afraid I will take more than an afternoon. So the good news is IFL, we do conduct complimentary workshops on each of these topics, which you can sign up for on our website. Towards the end of today's session, I will show you the link that you can actually sign up for. Okay, allow me to bring you to a warm-up poll. I would like to invite you to participate in this poll. On screen here, you see 3 data. The first 2 pertains to women and investment. And these 2 statements are actually from an OCBC survey conducted in 2020. While the third statistic, 37% of women put needs of their loved ones before themselves. This was conducted by UOB in 2017. So these 3 statements, they are reflective towards the current state of affairs towards financial planning. The question is, Do you agree or disagree for yourself? All right, do you agree or disagree for yourself? Okay. Coincidentally, you may be curious to understand the stats for male, right? The male counterparts are 48%, 60%, and 35% respectively. All right, okay, looks like we have an outcome. So 100% agree. Okay, right, so we want to look into each of these statements and maybe understand why is it that the data tells us this way. Okay, there are some differences when it comes to money matters for women. Okay, maybe I talk about the last data first. When we said 37% of women put their needs of loved ones before themselves, but if we to extrapolate it, what implication does it have on the financial front? Well, if 37%, if women tend to put the needs of their loved ones before themselves, this could also imply they tend to be the one to maybe take a step back from their career for caregiving needs, either to care for young children or even to care for their elderly parents. In so doing, they do give up a source of income. And the truth is, maybe some of them may not resume workforce that quickly, or some of them may not even return to the workforce. As a consequence, the lifetime CPF contribution for this group is therefore significantly lower, right? And we talk about retirement inadequacy. That coupled with a longer life expectancy for women, it tells us that it is even more important for women to put more thought into financial planning. And when we consider the investment perspective of women, we see that 28% of women are actually are confident, which means, right, majority of women tends to be very apprehensive about investment. Okay, so we talked about earlier, right? If we are good at savings, that's good, but we need to take it further to invest to grow our resources. And this is something women should look into because of the reasons I mentioned earlier: longer life expectancy, as well as they tend to, as well as demographics, right? They tend to take a step back from the workforce, right? And the second data, 70% of women invest by doing research or seek advice of others. And this tells us women prefers to make more informed decisions, which is not a bad thing, not a bad thing. Okay, and when it comes to investment, I would like to iterate, there are some factors that we actually need to take note of. These are important considerations before we invest our money. Okay, firstly, know what you need for fixed expenses. In other words, you have to do your budgeting. And you have to do your budgeting to know every month what are the fixed expenses out there, including your insurance, loan repayments, and what you need, your bread and butter needs. Secondly, before you venture into investments, please set aside an emergency savings, which should be about 3 to 6 times of your monthly expenses. Third thing, before you invest, please anchor your protection pillar by having basic health and life insurance policy. And should you be new to investment, please proceed with caution. Sometimes you may hear on the streets, high risk, high return, right? But there is actually a clarification to that statement. High risk may potentially give you high return, but there is an also equivalent high risk that you may lose part or all of your capital. So should you be a new investor, proceed with caution. Even if you need to start with simpler instruments, low-risk instruments, such as the Singapore Savings Bond, okay, do not be afraid to do so, right, by starting with such low and small investments, because it is a journey, and as you start learning about each instrument, it gives you greater insight into other areas of investment. Right, so for today here, if you are new to investment, please take note of this. And if you are a mother at home, you may want to discuss with your husband, right? A family planning should entail both husband and wife's contribution. Many a time, sometimes financial advisors may tend to actually sit down and converse more with the husband, either because the husband is the sole breadwinner, or they simply assume that the husband is in charge of the family financial planning. However, if you think about it, you may be a family unit, but between husband and wife, you may have different risk appetite. And therefore, if only the husband is engaged, the portfolio may result in an allocation that is more catered towards the husband. Okay, so important meetings with the financial advisor, I will strongly encourage the attendance of both husband and wife in order to have a more complete review. Okay? Now, when you are investing, there are also some factors you want to consider. Know what are your investment objectives, right? Align them with your financial goals, because if you think about it, investment is also a means to an end, right? It's a means to grow your resources in order to achieve your financial goal. Be mindful of your investment horizon, right? Your investment horizon is also dependent on probably your age, your runway to retirement. How long a horizon can you take? You can also align it to your financial goals. Now, I have mentioned earlier, high risk, high return, right? And while the common misunderstanding is high risk equals high return, please note, when we say that there are higher risks, it means there's a high risk that you may lose your capital as well. It's important that you understand your risk profile. You see, your investment appetite, your investment ability is different from that of your peers. It's even different from that of your spouse. So do take note to understand your risk profile. If you do not know where to start, okay, there are some resources that you can tap on. You can approach the CPF risk tolerance questionnaire online and just answer a very few simple questions. It is important, after you understand your risk profile, ensure that your investments are aligned to that. Sometimes, when we buy things, we like to ask for recommendations. But when it comes to investment, and we have to remember one point, right? What one man's meat could be another man's poison. Just because my neighbor or my friend is taking on this investment instrument, it may not be suitable for me, because we all have different risk profile. Okay, and therefore we should also take note of the last point, diversification. We have heard the saying, do not put all your eggs in one basket. The same definitely goes for our investment. Right? We must diversify to mitigate risk. As with all financial planning, okay, a good tool for us to get started will be to have an overview of what we currently have. And at this point, I would like to introduce to you a very useful tool, which is My Money Sense. My Money Sense is a government website. It gives you a cockpit view of your cash flow, your wealth, and your protection through the partnership with 7 banks and CDP. Right? In order for you to access, you would actually need to log in using your SingPass to retrieve your financial data. So this gives you a very good bird's eye view, not just of balances, but even your cash flow and your investment because of the tie-up with CDP. So this gives you a very good view for you to do your forward planning. Another tool that I would like to introduce would be a financial health check. Right? So you can actually go to scan the QR code and answer this financial health check questionnaire on Money Sense. It's a very straightforward questionnaire. It takes no longer than 5 minutes. So you just need to answer some questions, in your opinion, okay, what is true for yourself. And at the end of the questionnaire, the check will actually give you a report with some observations. It will also give you some recommendations about how you can make adjustments towards your savings, insurance, investment, or even your future planning. So if you're keen, do scan the QR code and complete your financial health check today. Now, before we move on to our Ask Me Anything segment, I would like to mention one last important aspect of financial planning, and that is actually future planning. Right? Future planning, taking care of our loved ones and ourselves, making sure that adequate provisions have been catered for. Right? So there are 4 components. Firstly, CPF nomination. Have you made your CPF nomination? Right? And if today you're a mother, right, did you nominate your spouse and children or your next of kin? Right? What I do know, some couples do is that they will nominate each other, right? Because children are underage. So they say, okay, wife nominate husband, husband nominate wife. But what happens in an event of a common disaster, whereby both husband and wife, they actually lose their life? So a good contingency would probably be to nominate maybe, if you have 2 children, 98% spouse, 1% a piece to each child. And that will actually mitigate the outcome of a common disaster, right? And of course, LPA, lasting power of attorney, is good to put some thought and some consideration. Who to appoint as your donee, a very important person, isn't it, to help make decisions in the event of mental incapacity. Joint financial assets, right? When we talk about joint financial assets, right? Under the rules of survivorship, okay, if two people own an asset under joint ownership, the surviving owner will automatically inherit the sole ownership. So when we enter into a purchase of an asset, be it a property or even your joint account balances, take note, this is the implication. In the event without a joint ownership, right, a spouse may find himself or herself locked out of the critical liquidity while the legal probate process is ongoing. Okay, the third component of future planning pertains to guardianship for us as parents with young children. This should be documented in your will, discuss with your spouse in the event of a common disaster. Who would be appointed guardian? These are all very important questions. Last but not least, we can't stress enough, planning your retirement, right? Taking charge of your own security, financial security when you reach old age. We already mentioned two things regarding women, right? The demographics and workforce trend. So with that in mind, it is all the more important that we need to do our planning for our retirement. Okay. Now at this point, I'm very happy to bring to you to the next segment of our AMA. But first, allow me to bring on my colleague, Swee Chu, who would be the moderator for the session. Hey, hi, Swee Chu.
Hey, hi, Jolene. Hi, everyone watching this afternoon. Thank you. I'm Swee Chu, and thank you for having me on the panel. I will be moderating the Q&A segment, helping to direct the questions and maybe even answering some of them together with Jolene, of course. Those of you who are watching, you can scan this QR code to access Slido, which is available on the internet. And this will be the software that we are using to input and to answer the questions. We will share Slido on screen so that all the participants will also be able to see the questions that are being keyed in. So I encourage you to do that. We already have a number of questions that have been asked before today, but priority will be given to live questions if we can. Now, before we start, perhaps I would like to have a short discussion of a couple of questions with Jolene. Yeah. The International Women's Day, as mentioned by Jolene, was completed a few days ago. And a common theme in many of the commentaries seems to be the disparity of men and women in the workplace. This creates disparity in income as well. Now, some women may become caregivers at home mid-career and give up their full-time job, thus sacrificing income and savings. You talked about retirement and financial adequacy. I have a friend who is a GP, a doctor, and his wife quit her professional job by choice to look after their young children when the children came along. The wife never went back to the workforce. My GP friend actually gives his wife a monthly stipend as a recognition of the value she creates and the sacrifice that she has put in for the family. This stipend obviously helps in some way to mitigate the effects of the pay equation for stay-home women. Do you think that there are other ways to achieve this? What do you think, Jolene, being a mother and a woman yourself?
Obviously, Swee Chu, I'd like to applaud your friend for actually giving the recognition to his wife that she had made a sacrifice and even to give her a monthly stipend, right? So yes, there could be other ways. I see by giving a monthly stipend definitely is to give the appreciation and also to acknowledge that just because she has put aside her source of income, she may still have her own expenses, her own needs, and that's to help meet that. But in the long run, just now we talked about women having a longer life expectancy and they have to cater towards the retirement. Your friend could possibly consider a pivoting of a monthly stipend to even include maybe a portion to top up her special account. The reason being, since she left the workforce, the contributions towards the CPF are not going to be forthcoming, right? Because she has not been working. So he can actually also consider topping up her CPF so that down the road, when she reaches her retirement age, she would be able to have sufficient pay for her CPF life. And of course, if the amount is higher, right, then her monthly payout under the CPF life would actually be higher. Concurrently, of course, by so doing, there will be certain tax incentive, right, for him to top up his spouse account, and that actually lowers the overall family expenses to an extent. Many a times, some women, they may feel that, okay, since my husband is a sole breadwinner, we will all rely on him. And even that comes to retirement. And sometimes they think, okay, with CPF life, we will just concentrate the resources on the husband's CPF life. But we are forgetting, right? What if the wife actually outlives the husband? Right? And then therefore, the monthly payout under the CPF life will not continue. So it is important that both husband and wife actually maintain their own CPF life. And this is a consideration, a suggestion that you may want to put forth to your friend. Secondly, as well, I think it's also important that he also discuss with his wife her insurance protection, right? Her insurance protection. No doubt she may not be a breadwinner to the family now, but certain areas of her hospitalization insurance, this also has to be anchored because down the road, right, you want her needs also to be protected on the healthcare front. Okay.
Great, thanks. So longevity, and also I guess societal values. I mean, many men in Singapore in particular would marry younger women. So, you know, if the woman also have longer longevity, then actually it's possible that the woman may outlive their husband by quite a number of years. So indeed, it's a very important thing to think about. Now, another question, when a couple marries, it is common to have joint bank accounts. I mean, you spoke about it in your last slide. Does that mean that the individual, may it be the wife or even the husband, has to subject his or her personal spending habits to scrutiny by the spouse? It can be quite stressful if the spouse is the principal breadwinner and the one bringing in the bacon. And if the spouse is also the domineering type. What do you suggest? What do you think?
Okay, firstly, joint account, I do see the benefits, both for efficiency and equity, right? So when we get married, we usually set up a joint account because we recognize there are joint household expenses. So, you know, instead of determining, okay, who pays what, right? Everything debit from the joint account and we contribute what we agree on sum into a joint account. But the rules kind of change, right? When one spouse decides to maybe take a step back from work, like what you mentioned. But if the spouse is the principal breadwinner and the non-working spouse may feel that his or her spending, right, is come under scrutiny because he or she is no longer an income contributor. Okay, firstly, when we talk about spending, I think this is one of the very key things we also discuss in our financial planning for couples workshop. It is something we have to talk very upfront to agree what are the boundaries of our spending, of our budgeting. And if it is within the framework, then I guess, right, we have to accept it. Second thing is, when we say that the principal breadwinner can be domineering, now to be fair, Suchu, when a spouse decides to leave the workforce, I always say it is a joint decision by both husband and wife. And even though I'm a woman, and many people say women, we sacrifice our career and take a step back. But I also want to give fair recognition. When the husband decides to take on the role of a sole breadwinner, that in itself may not be so much as a sacrifice, but he's really taking on a burden. So the understanding has to come, and many times it is a communication. Right? So the husband should also be open to share about, okay, this is my income, right? If we want to meet our financial goals, then maybe certain things we have to be mindful of our spending. But sometimes because of societal values, men may feel that they really need to take on certain burdens and they do not want to actually share, you know, their thoughts, their worries with their wives, and they take it on silently. But yet on the other hand, when they see the finances going haywire, right, they can't help but be showing concern, and sometimes that adds with stress to the marriage. So when it comes to this, it's really about communication. Right? If the husband feels that, okay, we can make do with one income, but then we will have to make some adjustments with our lifestyle. Right? If communication is not done, the wife will not know, right? And then she will not know, okay, what is my boundaries? What is it that we should save on, etc., etc. Okay, so to me, this is really an issue about communication, right?
Thank you, Jolene. Wow, that was some very interesting points and foods for thought. I guess we should now move on to the main segment of answering the Q&A questions that have been inputted on Slido. So for those of you who have not keyed in your questions, you can see the QR code on screen. Or if you go into the website, you can also key in the Slido code 233548. So I'm seeing a number of questions, 9 total. These are the ones that were asked previously already. The first question, what are the types of financial planning that can be done for various milestones? What are the types of financial planning that can be done for various milestones? It's a good question. I guess we should also bear in mind that throughout life's the journey, there are different milestones in our lives, getting married, having children along the way, children growing, becoming independent and retirement. And at each of these milestones, our obligations and our objectives do change. So Jolene, would you like to give some thoughts or inputs from your perspective? What do you think the types of planning should be done at these various milestones?
Indeed, as you mentioned, Suchu, financial planning should be done throughout lives. And to simplify matters, going back to what we have mentioned, the 3 pillars, right? Savings, protection, and investment. The difference is, as one probably journeys across various life stages, the calibration then have to be made according to each pillar. But for starters, I would always encourage young adults who are entering the workforce that it is important for them to inculcate good financial and money management habits, even as simple as savings and tracking expenses. Because, you know, a young adult to the workforce, tasting financial independence may get carried away. And therefore, it's important to anchor good habits right from the onset. Even to start putting thoughts to retirement planning, because age is on your side, you have a longer runway, the effect of compound interest is going to work to a greater extent for you. And of course, with every change in life stage, or at least once a year, you should review. For example, when we become parents, where we have more dependents, and this is time that we actually need to relook at our financial goals as spouse, as husband and wife, and also assess the level of insurance coverage that we currently maintain, is it adequate or not? But what I would like to add on, Suchu, is that sometimes when a woman leaves the workforce, she may feel that she may not have the resources to talk about financial planning anymore because she's not earning an income. She may just pivot her role and time to care for the family. And this is something we want to highlight because for the reasons discussed, longer life expectancy, lesser income, it is even more crucial for women to put thought into her financial planning. And it could be a joint effort together with the spouse, right? Because it is a joint decision for the roles to be a bit switched, right? Instead of both going out to bring in the bread and the dough. Okay, one is bringing the dough, the other one is baking the bread. So it is a joint decision. It is always now a question of we, not so much a matter of the husband just earning the money, okay, but both have to do it in conjunction. Future planning, we talked about it, estate planning. Okay, while we can put it in place right from the start, but given that life may change, we may have more dependence. The nominees, okay, may pass on. For example, if we nominate our parents, but they pass on, then we will still have to do updating. Right? So these are the certain financial planning that can be done for various key milestones.
Thank you, Jolene. Earlier, you mentioned home protection scheme, right? That's an important mortgage insurance. So essentially, it protects it covers the death of the borrower, and the insurance will pay out. And I know that under home protection scheme, there is an option to insure up to 100% of each borrower's life. So in a simple case of spouses, husband and wife, there's an option to insure up to 100% of the husband's life and 100% of the wife's life. At the very minimum, different percentages that adds up to 100%. I've had cases where people tell me that I'm the sole breadwinner and I'm the one that is paying the mortgage and all that. So therefore, it only makes sense to insure my life since you know I am the one making the payments. And my wife, even though she is a co-borrower on record, there is really no need to insure her. I always feel that may not be so prudent. Whether the husband or the wife passes on, the death of a partner is always a traumatic event. And you know, I think if we have something less to worry about in terms of finances, and even though the the spouse who passed on may not be the one making the payment, but the insurance can pay off to extinguish the mortgage, it would, I guess, go a long way towards the future consideration and reduce stress in a traumatic event. Don't you say so, right?
Indeed, Suchu. Indeed.
Next, two questions, I think we can take them together. One is how would financial planning be different for men and women? And then the other one by Yume, it's anything women should take note of other than longevity. I think you've covered many of these points, but perhaps just by way of summarizing again, Jolene, how would you say that planning could be different between men and women, and maybe what are some of the things that women should focus, pay attention to?
Indeed, as mentioned just now, we have mentioned the points a few times, right? Longer life expectancy, tendency to take a step back from the workforce. So the recognition, right, has to be that financial planning is actually more compelling for women. We are expected to live longer, but yet we are the one who tend to take a step back. So it may actually mirror a lack of retirement adequacy. Right? So when it comes to such financial planning, one aspect that frequently comes into the picture is that of women and investing. And that's something that we want to talk about. Because I also saw in a Business Time article last week showing that women are less confident when it comes to financial and investment matters. We also saw that when we did a poll earlier, right, Suju?
Yep.
Okay. And that is less confident in comparison with the male counterparts. But interestingly, in the very same study, it do show that women can make good investors because of their discipline and their tendency not to commit in overconfidence. So what could be used to bridge the gap? It could be knowledge, understanding your risk profile, understanding in various investment instruments before making that first step. And so for women, who knows that there has an inadequacy when it comes to retirement resources and they would like to grow it, the key thing is then to take the first step. Do consider investment. And many times investment does not mean investing in high-risk instruments. Right? There are many instruments out there. We've mentioned some of them. The Singapore Savings Bond. Even tapping on very low-hanging fruits like our CPF is one way that we can actually leverage on to grow our resources to ensure, right, that towards the end of our life, we would have adequate resources to be able to retire, given that we are expected to outlive our spouse. Right? And I've mentioned, to ensure that you are able to start your own CPF life. Do not make the mistake of just relying on your spouse CPF line, right, in the event that you actually outlive your husband. Okay?
Great, thanks. All right, so moving on, we've been talking about couples so far. So, the next question is about life as a single. So, well, as much as a woman who is single by choice, or actually even a man who is single by choice. And the question is, how much do I need to save up to live on my own as a single? I guess the question has to do with, does the person intend to buy a property and own it by herself or himself, or the person is open to renting? I think the concept of renting in Singapore is not so prevalent. So I would assume that the question is more geared towards owning of the asset. There are eligibility criteria for HDB properties, and they may require singles to be a little bit older before they can actually apply for these properties. What do you think, Jolene? How would you approach this question?
Well, firstly, you want to save up to live on your own as single. We accept, some people are very happily single. So this number is not going to be a universal number. Like what you mentioned, Suchu, it depends, on your living expenses, right? And if you talk about home ownership, would you be then qualified for maybe public housing come the age of 35 years old? Okay? And to be able to track, we do have resources on our IFL, our budget, our expense tracking. So this will work out very clearly. Okay, what is the amount needed per month? You can break it down into different categories, be it transport, be it your personal expenses. But if you're to look at living on your own, talking about home ownership, my encouragement is to spend some thought, not just to look at the monthly installment outlay. But when we talk about the cost of home ownership, especially if you're buying, then you have to actually budget for the renovation, right? You have to budget for the furnishing. And that is for that reason, I am probably a bit more conservative. I would prefer home ownership as opposed to renting. So if I'm in my early 30s, I'm not up to 35 to buy my own BTO, I would actually hold out. If I have a place to stay, that is, I would actually hold out because I am mindful that the moment I do own my own home, it's not just a monthly installment. Right? There are a lot of ongoing costs to be maintained, and therefore my expenditure could actually arise quite quickly. And would that then interfere with my other expenses? Would that then interfere with my other obligations? Or would that actually slow down the rate at which I can achieve my financial goals? Right? So knowing how much you need to save up to live on your own as a single, okay, these are answers, right, that you can first answer by asking yourself, right, what is the flat that you want? What is the, if you are looking at BTO, what are some indicative prices? And what is the budget you have for your renovation and your furnishing? Okay, so then that will be what we can work towards too.
I guess the next question is also related. How will the planning be different for married women as compared to single ladies? I often tell my participants in my workshop that there are economies of scale living with a partner. You know, two person would cost less per head compared to one person, where it may be groceries, maybe rental. Me and my wife love to go cruising before the COVID days. And it is very apparent that if you book a cabin as a couple on a per head count basis, the charge is lower compared to if you're traveling as a single. So there's always the economies of scale, but I suppose everyone have their own preferences. And if you choose to, by choice, to live as a single, I think you have to expect that some of these expenses might be higher. Jolene, I'm not sure if you have any other points to add to this question about married woman versus single lady.
Yes, you have mentioned on the expense front, Suchu, and I totally agree with you. There are economies of scale. So when it comes to married women as compared to single ladies, perhaps something I would like to point out to single ladies is that's on legacy planning. Now, for me as a married woman, my LPA, it became very natural for me to actually nominate my husband as a donee. Right? And if my husband were to pass on before me, I would probably nominate one of my children. By then they would be of age. So as a single lady, right, then that is an area that you want to put your thoughts to, your planning towards when it comes to legacy planning. Right? Is there someone that you can actually trust to be appointed as a donee? And if you have someone in mind, engage that person in discussion. Because a donee is a very tremendous responsibility. You will need to engage that person in discussion as well. Or even if your assets, who would you want to then bequeath them to? So it's on that front that probably a single woman may want to put some thought to, right? In fact, if I'm not wrong, even if we, in the absence of children, you can even appoint a trust company, right, to be a donee, but they can only save for property affairs.
That's correct. In fact, there's a scheme under public the public guardians OPG's office, where it's called the Professional Deputies and Donee Schemes. So that's a scheme where qualified accredited professionals, typically in the accounting profession, social work, or law, actually are able to be rented or hired as a appointed trust donee or a deputy. So you can appoint these people for both financial and personal welfare matters. Whereas for trust companies, you are absolutely right. Typically, it will only be applicable for financial matters. You don't expect a trust company to be looking after your personal welfare. You mentioned about LPA and the importance of it to single person. That brings to mind something which my ex-boss had said to me. She remained single by choice, and she always said that she needed to cultivate friendship, long-term friendship of younger friends and associates, because the day may come in the future where, you know, she needs help. And this is where, you know, she can lean on some of these friends and associates to help her. And it is, they don't appear suddenly. Obviously, it takes years, time to cultivate them. And you want them to be younger than you are, so that, you know, when you are in your golden years, these people will still be able to help take care of some of these care decisions. So yeah, I think that's an important area. Let's move on to the next question. I'm a stay-home mom to my kids who are aged 3 and 5 years old. How can I ensure financial security for myself, since I am reliant on my husband? Jolene, I think you covered some aspects of it. Perhaps you want to reiterate and expand on what you've talked about earlier.
Sure, no problem. In fact, this question strikes quite close to home, because I was also a stay-home mom for about 2 to 3 years before I rejoined the workforce on a flexi basis. So during that time, it was a period of adjustment, really, because while you're so used to being financially independent, earning a keep, suddenly the equation has changed, right? And everybody is reliant on one person. So sometimes temper may flare, and there may be moments of financial insecurity because you're no longer earning an income. You may feel that you do not have the rights to certain decisions within the household. And that just adds on, right? It just adds on in a very vicious cycle. Okay, so as mentioned, for a spouse to leave the workforce and be a caregiver is a joint decision between both husband and wife. So the moment a family decides to take on that decision, it is in recognition that it is for a partnership but playing different roles. And the planning has to be on a we basis, right? Meaning, okay, you may do this, a job of bringing in the dough, and I will bake the bread. So have a good communication with the husband. What are certain areas that you still have to look out for? It will be then a common goal of how, okay, the husband may work to help both of you achieve certain retirement goals. Because the wife's contribution, right, may not be measured in terms of dollars and cents, but it is also very important. And at the same time, I would also like to assure this mother, you may also want to consider how long will this arrangement be for you to be a stay-home mom. You mentioned that your children are aged 3 and 5 years old. As they grow older, when they move on to primary school, you could have avenues, right, that you may actually resume the workforce, either on a full-time basis or even on a flexi basis. So this situation may not be permanent. It may be a passing. And it is a time that, you know, as a family, you decide together that this is how you want to journey through. Children are young, you want to be more hands-on to take care of them. Nothing wrong with that. Okay? And on the financial front, okay, the husband is bringing, so have a good communication. In fact, I do know many mothers, right? They actually consider certain home-based business. With thanks to technology, there are many home-based business that I see sprouting up, be it a home bakery, be it craft, etc. And they really operate from home. I think I give it to them, right? They are able to put their skill set, right, whichever their skill set is, into actually a source of income. So for you, if that is something that you are concerned about, right, then it may be worth exploring as well. Or if your husband does give you a stipend, then you treat that as your income. Continue to save, okay, put aside, invest to your comfort, and do your own financial planning with the resources that you have, right?
Okay, thank you, Jolene. Now, the next question is about CPF nomination. And the question goes like this: should I nominate my CPF monies to my children instead of my husband in case he remarries when I'm gone? I guess the point to take note of is that the CPF nomination is important. We certainly all must make our nominations if you have not already done so. At the same time, nominations is a revocable decision. So which means to say that, you know, you can also change the nominations later on. So by no means that once you make a nomination that is cast in stone and you cannot change it. What happens after the spouse is gone, and what would the husband do is indeed a concern for couples. The husband may remarry, and if the husband remarries, may have children from the next marriage, or even stepchildren from the another marriage, and it could certainly complicate the situation. Jolene, do you have any suggestions or advice for this?
Perhaps I'll share with what I have actually personally done. And of course, I would like to just assert that I don't expect everyone to follow because everyone has different viewpoints. When I did my CPF nomination, I'll be very open. I did consider this matter, right? What if my husband remarries? And after thinking, right, I nevertheless nominated majority to him. The reason being, right, I trust my husband that in my absence, he will still love his children. If he remarries, he still love his children. But again, as mentioned, that is my personal take based on my current marriage and my trust in my husband. Okay, so in this case, we recognize, maybe some people may want to have some safeguards. So like what you mentioned, CPF nomination is revocable. You can make changes to that. And this question is probably more catered towards when the children are younger. You're afraid that because they are not yet financially independent in your absence, right? Is there another way to safeguard? You can nominate your parents, okay, by the time, okay, if they are not around, and then you can actually redo the nomination again. You can also nominate to your children, but because they are underage, the accessibility, it will still come under the legal parent, which is the other spouse. So some parents may actually say, okay, I will CPF nominate my children, but instead of cash, it will go towards their CPF account. And that's another way that you can actually approach.
Great, thanks. If I may expand this question a little bit and talk about transfer instruments beyond just CPF nomination. And let's talk about wills, right? So I know that in the context of the Singapore law, it is possible for the parent, husband and wife, to make what is called a mutual will. So the wills that would look like each other, giving to the beneficiaries in a certain way, and the will is made in such a way only on the basis that the other person does not change the will when you pass on, and that's why it's called a mutual will. It's in a way locking in your plans to implement it in a certain way, even if one person is no longer around. Of course, then that ensures that the surviving spouse may have a challenge, because then he or she may not be able to change the instrument. So whilst it achieved the concern about security, it also adds to the inflexibility. All said, this is not a talk on estate planning. You should really consult a licensed advisor or a legal professional to discuss these matters. All right. Let me skip to the last question I see on the screen here, which looks like an interesting one. So let's explore this together, Jolene. We live in a matrimonial property which was gifted by my in-laws. I suppose it was gifted to the one spouse, right? Because he says, legally, I'm not an owner of the property. I feel insecure financially, I suppose, because the name of the asset is in the name of only one spouse. What should I do? What should I do? If this question was asked from a woman's perspective, Jolene, I believe there's something called matrimonial assets and the woman's charter. So to some extent, that should give some kind of protection. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to go into the legal intricacies of it. From a counselor's perspective, I guess one of the things to do is to have a honest communication. I mean, you talked about joint accounts and having honest communication in order to overcome that concerns about one party spending more than the other. How would you approach this question, Jolene?
Okay, when I look at this, firstly, I mean, this is in a way, a good problem, because most of us, when we are getting married, we are actually stressing over our place of residence, right? To buy a house is so costly, but here it is a gift. So that is what I call a good problem. But nevertheless, I do hear this person, like there is some sensing of insecurity. And again, I'm second guessing. It can possibly come from two angles. Firstly, because a home, right, is such a big asset. And in the context of a marriage, right, you may feel that it should be a shared asset within the couple's portfolio. But over here, it's very clear legally it is under the husband's name. So you may feel that, oh, we are married, but you are carving up your own asset. And that is actually a very sizable asset, right? So that's one. Another angle where the insecurity may stem from, and that, to be honest, is something I feel that it is quite legitimate. It is when it comes to future planning, right? Especially when kids come into the picture. In a situation of an unforeseen death by the spouse who owns the property, would there be a dispute over the ownership? Under the laws of intestacy, we know, right, if spouse survived by spouse and children, asset will go to spouse and children. Okay, but because it is gifted, could there be a contesting? And like what you mentioned is true. When the spouse passes, it's a tragic event, right? Already there's a lot of grieving. You really try to minimize other sources of stress. And so in this case, right, that could be an area of insecurity, because should the property be in a joint ownership, then there's less room for dispute, because joint ownership, the ownership will automatically transfer to the surviving partner. So if the insecurity is from the latter, okay, whereby you feel what happens in that event, okay, then we mentioned certain will instruments, right, that actually we can actually put it across, and the husband or the spouse, whoever is owning the asset, can make plans where the property is concerned. Right? If he would like to be fair to them, then that is a conversation he then has to engage. I would say much is given, much is required. Right? If a gift has been gifted and he wants to be accountable to both parties, then it is his duty to make sure he has done the necessary legwork. Otherwise, this will be a stress for two parties whom we love very much, isn't it? Okay, but if you're talking about shared assets in a portfolio, okay, then down the road, the spouse, right, because cash flow is freed up, you're not paying for this house, you may continue your second investment in another home if that is what you all want, if that is within your affordability as well, right?
Indeed, indeed. We spoke so much about communication and discussion, and so I feel we need to at least address the next question on discussion templates. Can you recommend any discussion templates that might be helpful for husband and wife to have a meaningful discussion about family finances? Julian, I know that IFL has a workshop. Nowadays it's also done online, called Financial Planning for Couples. Financial Planning for Couples, and it's a workshop, and that will have collateral materials that husband and wife can use in their discussions about family finances. So obviously, one recommendation is to sign up for that workshop. Do you have anything to add?
No. In fact, talking about the workshop, I believe we do have one coming up this month. We do hold it quite on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I think it's next Sunday.
Next Sunday, right? So I would encourage, as what you mentioned, there's a lot of collateral. And many a times when you hear from an independent party, it can thus inspire and sets the setting for it for discussion. All right. So do attend the workshop.
Yeah. There's one question that I wanted to tackle, but it's already scoped past. That is, do you have any investment suggestions that suited for women, or are there investments suited for women? What do you think, Jolene?
My angle for this question, not so much as a more gender-geared investment, but really investment as a ballgame. It is really about understanding each own's risk profile, your own preference, right? So I will not say that, because to answer this question, it is to assume that all women actually share the same risk appetite. And then there will be a misconception that women are very low risk. So then in actual fact, this could be a question asking, are there low risk investments suited for women? But I beg to differ, right? I beg to differ because sometimes women may start out as being perceived as low risk because of a lack of financial confidence, because of lack of exposure towards certain investments. So we mentioned, right, if you are new to investment, yes, you may want to start with something more of a lower risk, just to understand the instrument better. Okay, and then slowly, right, it's a learning journey, you progress from there.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to the investment objective. What is the investment objective? And clarity of our objective. So sometimes maybe we may be a bit murky and misunderstood what our actual objectives are. With the help of licensed advisors and professionals, that could shed some light on clarity, and that's useful sometimes. We are quickly running close to the end of the hour. We have time for one more question. Jolene, I let you pick the question that you want to answer.
Okay. Right. So we talked a lot about married women. So maybe if we talk about, my mom has dementia and she lives with me, but her bank accounts are all in joint name with my brother. Okay, what should I do to plan for the future? I would like to take this question because I think it's pertinent in the age that we live in. I think the aging population and all, right? So this situation, right, mother has dementia, but finances are actually in joint name with brother. Although I'm not clear at this point whether an LPA has actually been executed by her mother prior to the onset of dementia, okay, but let's assume it hasn't, and therefore, there's this question of, in terms of planning, dementia we do know can be very long drawn, right? It's not easy on the caregiver. So while you do actually have to take care of mom's ongoing needs, but these needs actually also has financial cost to that. So do also engage your brother, right? If the funds are actually in a joint name with the brother, then how are they going to be applied towards the upkeep of the medical fees, like the long-term care, etc., be it home care, okay, or even down the road, what are the plans? Because there has to be joint ownership, right? Mother belongs to both her and her brother. So do talk with your brother. Okay, what is the care plan, right, that you all would like, or if you don't know, for your mother, right? And how is that going to be funded? Will that be funded by the balances in the joint bank account? And what happens when that runs out? In your own capacity, okay, how are you all going to cope? And then you can also research on what are some framework that you can fall back on, be it your MediSave, which also can be used, right? MediShield now can also be used for hospice care, etc. Because long-term care is something to think about. It can be very long drawn, and the expenses, right, will just be recurring in that sense.
Thank you, Jolene. I completely agree with you. In fact, I would say that just like with couples, siblings too should have open communication. They will have different preferences, but I think it's a common mother. So, they have to come to an agreement, the type of care, the cost of the care, and how is the cost going to be provided for and paid for. And if there are more significant monies, in particular in the bank account that are joined with the brother, or even other assets that is in the mother's name, it probably useful at this juncture for the siblings or the beneficiaries who potentially could benefit from the mother's assets. And I'm here assuming the mother has no will, to then try to have a common understanding as to what the mother would have liked for her assets to be distributed. And to be legally secured, I suppose the siblings can all troop to a lawyer's office and then have all this legal understanding put together on a piece of paper. It may not solve all the problem, but I think openness and transparency, it's very important. Anyhow, we are coming to the end of the hour. And at this stage, I would close the Q&A. If there are more questions or questions that are not answered, Jolene, you have a slide that will show us what they can, the participants can do to see those questions answered. I hand it over back to you, Jolene.
Indeed, Sichu. Now, we regret that we may not be able to answer every question. Now, should you have other burning questions, please do email us at ifl@sbi.edu.sg, or you can post your questions at finlearn.sg, which is another platform a community for like-minded learners to embark on their financial learning journey. I mentioned that we do host many sessions on various financial planning topics. So if you're keen, do scan the QR code and sign up, where you'll be able to see the list of upcoming events, talks, and workshops. Now, if you are keen to learn more on this financial journey, you may also follow us at the various social media platforms or even visit us at our website. Last but not least, we would like to have your feedback on today's session. So you may scan the QR code and give us your feedback. At the same time, do stay tuned to our upcoming AMA podcast, and we will be able to delve deeper into certain segments of today's topic on our own personal experiences. So stay tuned. We'll post the sessions on our Facebook page. Thank you very much and enjoy your weekend.